Warning, you shouldn't be here to listen to my creepy story. I always thought the job of a park ranger would be peaceful hiking trails, helping lost hikers, protecting wildlife. That was until my last patrol at Stone Hollow National Park. If you're into creepy park ranger stories, this is one for the books. Let's just say, I won't be going back. Ever. It started on a crisp October morning. The leaves were falling like confetti, and the air had that eerie silence you only notice once you've been in the wilderness too long. I was covering the Northwestern Ridge Trail, a part of the forest that hadn't seen visitors in weeks. That should have been the first red flag. There had been reports of strange noises, flickering lights at night, and even missing wildlife. One hiker, a regular on that trail, had left a comment on Reddit under the thread, "True Creepy Story," saying he'd heard a child laughing in the woods. At 2 a.m. Funny, right? Until you realize that section of the park had no campsites and no families. Still, I chalked it up to paranoia and too many creepy outdoor stories floating online. But the forest, it has a way of watching you. And I was about to learn that the hard way. By noon, I was halfway down the ridge when my walkie crackled. Unit 13 status check. I pressed the button. Unit 13. All good. No sign of activity. But before I could let go, I heard it. A voice, whispering through the static. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. The voice wasn't from dispatch. It wasn't even from my frequency. And it wasn't human. I called back. "Repeat that, Unit 13. I have interference on my channel." Silence, then static. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was just cross-frequency noise. Radios do that sometimes in the woods, but deep down my gut knew this was the start of something I couldn't explain. About an hour later, I stumbled upon something not marked on the map. A cabin. Broken windows, moss-covered walls, door slightly ajar. It looked like something straight out of a horror story. I'd never seen it before, and I'd been patrolling this park for 4 years. I radioed in. Unit 13, found abandoned structure. Coordinates 39, 227, N121.678 Tumbleweed. Not on map. Requesting data cross-check. Dispatch responded minutes later. No known structures in that region. Unit 13, are you certain of your coordinates? I'm standing on them, I replied. Cabin's real. Proceed with caution. I approached slowly. As I stepped onto the porch, the wooden floor groaned beneath my boots. I pushed the door open. It didn't creak. It screamed. Inside, dust decay and something else. A notebook sat on the table, open to a page scrawled in shaky handwriting. "It watches from the trees. I heard it whisper my name last night. If you find this, don't go upstairs." My eyes darted to the staircase. There was an upstairs, and I made the worst decision of my life. I went up. I moved to Arizona after leaving the ranger job. Small town, desert air, no woods, no parks. I wanted nothing to do with trees ever again. But trauma doesn't care where you go, it follows. The nightmares started immediately. Same scene every night. I'm back at Stone Hollow, standing at the bottom of the stairs in that unmarked cabin. I hear the creak, I feel the cold draft, and the voice, always the voice. "You shouldn't be here." One night I woke up screaming. The notebook, the same one from the cabin, was on my nightstand. I had burned it a week ago. That's when I realized I never left the woods. Not really. For a while I stopped sleeping, started researching instead. There wasn't much about Stone Hollow's Northwestern Ridge online, no historical records, no property documents. But on a deep Reddit thread titled "True Creepy Stories from National Parks," I found something. A user named Old Tree Watcher 88 had posted, "There's a cabin in Stone Hollow, not on maps. Locals know to stay away. Rangers don't talk about it. If you hear it whisper, you're already marked." I replied, asked for more. No answer. The next day, the post was deleted, the account too. A week later, a package showed up at my door. No return address. Inside, a cassette tape, dusty and unlabeled, and a note typed in courier font, "Listen, but not alone." Against all better judgment, I bought a tape player from a thrift shop. I waited till morning, full sunlight, doors locked, phone on. Then I pressed play. The tape hissed for 10 seconds, then silence, and then a voice. Male, shaking, it followed me, out of the woods, into town. At first it only stood at the edge of my yard, watching, but now it's inside. A thud, scraping, a long wet breath. If you're hearing this, don't ignore it. It wants to be remembered. The moment you listen, it knows you. That's how it spreads. It's not just a story, it's a seed. The tape ended. I didn't sleep that night either. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. Lights flickered. Appliances turned on by themselves. One morning I found boot prints, bare feet in the dust by my window. They led to the door, but not away. Then my neighbor Sam went missing. They said he probably wandered into the desert drunk, but I saw the look in his eyes the night before, the same vacant terror I used to see in the mirror. Something had followed me from the scary woods stories into reality. I had no choice. I had to go back to the source, to end it. I drove 2 states and a dozen hours back to Stone Hollow. The ranger station was quieter than I remembered. Too quiet. I asked about the northwestern ridge. The younger rangers shrugged, said that trail had been closed for over a year due to land instability. Bullshit. It was always the thing, not the land. I didn't wait for permission. I took my old path up the ridge. Compass, flashlight, flare gun, and the notebook, still with me, still blank until it wasn't. Midway through the trail, I took it out. There was new writing. Welcome back. The trees thickened. The air grew still, and there it was again, the cabin. Just as rotten, just as broken. But this time, the rocking chair was on the porch, and it was already moving. I didn't go in, I didn't have to, because the forest opened behind it like a mouth. There was a clearing that wasn't there before, and in that clearing stood something, tall, black, moving but without motion. It was like the absence of everything. I raised my flare gun, aimed, fired. The forest lit up in red. For a second I saw it clearly. Eyes, thousands, just like before, but this time they blinked, and the ground started to pulse like a heartbeat. Like the forest itself was alive and angry. I ran. Branches slashed my face. Roots grabbed at my ankles, and then silence. I was back at the cabin again. Same spot, same notebook on the porch. Only now it was open, and the page said, "Run all you like. This is your home now." I didn't remember passing out. I only remember waking up in a hospital room 3 days later. A man was waiting beside my bed, wore a clean uniform, but it wasn't park ranger standard. "Mr. Keaton," he said, "I'm Agent Heller. We need to talk." I asked about the cabin. He didn't blink. "You weren't the first to find it," he said. "You won't be the last, but you're the only one who came back alive, twice." He handed me a folder. Inside were photos, old ones, black and white. The same cabin, but taken in the 1950s, 1970s, 1999. Always the same spot, never on maps, never in records. One picture showed a man inside staring through the upstairs window. It was me. Whatever that thing is, Heller said, it uses memory. It uses story. You spoke about it, you wrote it down. That's how it moves. "So what do we do?" I asked. He didn't answer, just stood, then said, "You're going to help us contain it. They call the program Black Forest. It's not government, not really. Not military, something in between. Our job track wilderness stories, especially ones that come from national park stories, creepy ranger encounters, even let's not meet style incidents from forums like Reddit. Because true horror stories aren't fiction anymore. They're infections. The cabin, it appears, where belief is strongest. And now, thanks to people like me, it's starting to appear outside national parks too. So here's your warning. If you ever go camping and hear footsteps outside your tent at night, if your radio crackles and you hear your name whispered, if you find a notebook that isn't yours open to a blank page that slowly fills as you watch, burn it. And if you dream of a cabin in the woods, don't go upstairs because it's still watching and it knows you now. They say once you've seen the cabin, it never leaves you. But no one warned me what would happen if the cabin started calling others. That's what part 3 is about. Not my story, not entirely. This one's about a Reddit user named @PineFinders, or a survivalist and ex-scoutmaster who posted a thread titled "Let's Not Meet. Whatever I saw in Black Hollow Woods." It was tagged under True Creepy Stories. I saw the post 2 days after I joined the Black Forest program. It began like any classic creepy outdoors story. We were hiking a seldom-used trail in Redwood Canyon when we came across a clearing that wasn't on the map. My dog froze hackles up, and then I saw it, a cabin, middle of nowhere, windows covered with paper, no signs of human life, but it was warm inside. My blood turned cold. I knew that structure. He continued. There were words carved into the door. I traced them with my hand. They read, "The story must be told." We flagged the post. Black Forest tried reaching the user. No reply. Until 2 days later when we got a signal ping. It came from a satellite phone registered to that same username. The location, Stone Hollow National Park. Again, how many times could a place be buried and still breathe? Agent Heller sent me and a new recruit, Ellie, a former biologist and one of the few people who believed me from the start. This time he said, "You don't go in alone." Ellie and I geared up and hit the trail at dawn. The Northwest Ridge, again the cursed spine of that place. But something was different. The trees weren't still anymore. They murmured. It was like they'd learned to speak since my last visit. Whispers traveled from trunk to trunk, never louder than a breeze, but always saying something. And then came the static. My radio, off by default, flared to life. You shouldn't be here." Ellie's eyes went wide. "Did you hear that?" I nodded. "Now do you believe?" She said nothing, but her fingers gripped her taser like it was the only real thing left. Midway up the trail, the wilderness changed. The air grew thick like syrup in our lungs. The trees pressed closer together and even the sky seemed lower. Then, like clockwork, it appeared again. The cabin, but this time it looked fresh. New wood, curtains, a porch swing gently moving, as if it had just been built yesterday. Ellie reached for her camera. This shouldn't exist. The door creaked open before she could click, and a voice called out, "Help me!" Not from inside, from above. We looked up. A man was sitting on the roof, arms wrapped around his knees, clothes torn, face hollowed by days of exposure. It was PineFinder 94. We got him down slowly. His skin was cold, his eyes unfocused, but he spoke. "Did you read it?" he asked. Ellie frowned. "Read what?" "The post. My story. It's how it got out. I thought telling would save me, but it just spread." He looked at me like he'd seen me before. "You're him, aren't you? The one from the notebook?" I froze. I had never shown anyone that notebook, never posted a picture, never wrote about the cabin online. "How do you?" But he was shaking now, whispering over and over, "It writes itself, it writes itself, it writes itself." We carried him down as fast as we could. Halfway down the ridge, I called base. But the radio screamed in response, a long, drawn-out shriek, like metal being torn apart. And then silence. PineFinder 94 stopped walking. He turned his head slowly. "It's here," he said. The trees around us began to twist. Literally, their trunks spiraled unnaturally, creaking with bone-like pops. Ellie pulled her sidearm, but we were surrounded. From behind every tree, figures emerged. Not full people, just fragments. A face with no eyes, a body with no limbs, mouths, dozens of them whispering out of sync. Let us read. Let us be remembered. That's when I realized it wasn't just a cabin, it wasn't just a demon, it was a story. A living, breathing story that had tasted its own narrative and wanted more. The more people told it, read it, posted about it on Reddit, or whispered it in campfire stories, the more it grew. We ran. Pinefinder lagged behind, screamed something, we didn't hear it. We didn't look back, not until we reached the trailhead and he was gone. All that remained was the tape recorder from his bag. Still running. Back at base, we played it. It wasn't a message, it was reading something. A transcript of his Reddit post, word for word. And after the last line, it said, "Another version complete. More readers incoming." Since then, 5 more hikers have gone missing in Stone Hollow, all of them active on True Scary Stories forums. All of them had posted tales titled things like creepy stories from national parks, wilderness stories gone wrong, and scary horror stories you won't believe. They're not just stories anymore, they're invitations. I asked Agent Heller once, why not shut down the internet threads? Ban the keywords. He sighed. It doesn't work that way. This thing doesn't need the web, it just needs memory. Memory passed on, whispered, shared. The cabin's not a place, it's a pattern. It manifests wherever belief is strong enough. So how do we stop it? He looked tired. You don't. But maybe you can contain it, and that's what this is. This story, the one you're reading now, isn't for entertainment. It's a trap to slow it down, because the moment it's told wrong, it loses power. It needs fear, curiosity, emotion. But if you treat this like just another true horror story, like just another creepy park ranger story you scroll past on Reddit, then maybe it can't grow. So here's what I ask. Don't share this. Don't upvote it. Don't send it to your friend who loves scary stories. Let it die here, because the more people read it, the more people dream of that cabin, the closer it gets to being real again. And next time you see a rocking chair move on its own, don't turn around, because you know who's behind you. And now it knows you. Pinefinder 94's recorder kept looping, another version complete, more readers incoming. It sounded mechanical now, less like a recording, more like a system function. A signal, a feed, like whatever we were dealing with wasn't a creature, it was a network. Ellie and I stared at each other, neither of us blinking. This thing isn't haunting a cabin, she said quietly. It's haunting stories. And then the lights flickered in the Black Forest Operations Center. Once, twice, all monitors turned black, and on each screen the same message appeared, block text, old serif font, "The story demands an audience." Agent Heller stormed in seconds later. "We're compromised. Lock it down." "What's going on?" Ellie asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled down a projector screen and clicked on a hidden folder labeled Red Threads. "I didn't want to show you this until it was necessary," he muttered. On the screen were dozens of Reddit posts, all archived from different subreddits. R Farce and No Sleep, R Let's Not Meet, R Bars True Scary Stories, even R Arm Backpacking. Each post started innocently. "I had a weird experience at a national park. This might be nothing, but something followed me after a solo trip. A story my uncle told me before he passed." But then, all the posts converged. Same details, same phrases: cabin, no map, rocking chair, whispers. One recurring keyword, always hidden deep in the comments: "Have you read the Ranger's story? That's how it spread." Me. I thought we scrubbed all those Heller hissed pacing, but someone keeps reposting. Fragments, rewrites, fake versions with enough truth to keep the signal alive. "The signal?" Ellie asked. "It's not supernatural anymore," I said. "It's informational. A meme. The oldest one, the kind that doesn't just spread through words, but through fear." Heller nodded grimly. "Welcome to the wilderness," he said. "This is where true horror stories don't just get told. They replicate, like viruses." We didn't sleep that night. Instead, we combed through every single post, trying to trace the origin. At 3:41 a.m., we found it. A post from 2008 under a now-defunct account. "I was a park ranger in Stone Hollow for 12 years. I quit after my last patrol. No one believes me, but maybe you will. Don't go upstairs." There it was, my line, typed out in full, years before I ever took the job. I leaned back in my chair. "Someone wrote me into this," I whispered. Ellie's voice cracked. "What if this isn't your story? What if it's its story and you're just the next chapter?" Silence. Then the alarms went off. Unauthorized transmission detected. I ran to the terminal. Someone had uploaded our audio logs to YouTube, not just the tape, our field reports. Ellie's voice, my voice, a full recreation of everything we had experienced in the wilderness. Comments were already coming in. "This feels real. Got chills. Please make part 2. Can someone post this to Reddit? Subscribed for more creepy park ranger stories." We shut it down in under 15 minutes, but it was too late. The feed was live. The next morning, 2 new missing hiker reports came in from a completely different location, Blue Creek National Forest in Montana. Never had any park ranger stories attached to it before. But now both victims had watched the video the night before. One of them even commented, "I had a dream about the cabin last night. Going for a hike tomorrow to clear my head. LOL. I tried to leave, resign again, delete myself from the equation, but the notebook returned always, the notebook. This time it was already open on my bed when I got home. I hadn't brought it with me, hadn't seen it in days, but the ink was still wet. You're not the author, you're the archive." It started appearing in other mediums. A short horror podcast episode, exact transcript of my first encounter. A comic strip posted on DeviantArt. Even a children's book at a garage sale titled "The Little House in the Trees." The cabin was in all of them. And always, always a voice whispering through a line that no one else seemed to notice, but that I heard in every version, "You shouldn't be here." Ellie tried to fight back. She launched what she called a signal-burying protocol, flood the web with fake horror stories, exaggerated creepypasta garbage that made the real thing feel diluted. It worked, for a time. Then something horrifying happened. The cabin adapted. Now it started showing up in parodies, reaction videos, scary wood stories, animation channels. People thought it was fun, a new genre. They gave it a name, The Cabin Creep. They turned it into merch, TikToks, horror games, cameos in animated shorts. Every time someone said, "It's just a story," it smiled wider. Last week, Ellie vanished. Her apartment was empty, no signs of forced entry, except on her mirror written in marker, "I went upstairs." I think I know what the cabin is now. It's not a demon, not a ghost. It's our collective need for fear. A living algorithm in the shape of a story. One that started in a national park but now lives in our minds, screens and shelves. And you've read this far. You've felt the tingling in your spine. You've imagined the chair rocking, heard the static, wondered, is this real? You're part of the feed now. What happens next? That depends. Do you close this and forget, or do you scroll back to the top, send it to a friend, share it on Reddit? Say, "Yo, check out this creepy ranger story," because the cabin is listening. And every time it's remembered, it gets closer to your door. The first time I saw his name, it was scribbled at the bottom of a ranger report from 1974, half faded in red ink. Signed, T.E. Weaver, Senior Ranger, Black Hollow Division. I didn't think much of it. Just another name in the long list of park ranger stories from decades past, men and women who'd vanished into the wilderness, sometimes with a trace, sometimes without. But then I found it again. Same name, different year, 1986, then 1993, then 2007. Each time a different format, a ranger memo, a journal entry, a torn page from a field guide, a typed transcript of a Reddit post that had mysteriously disappeared, but always the same name at the bottom, T.E. Weaver. Ellie was gone. I hadn't heard from Agent Heller in days. Black Forest had gone dark, and the notebook now refused to close. No matter where I put it, drawer, safe, fire, it always returned. Open, growing, every day more words, written in a voice I didn't recognize, but that felt familiar. One night I wrote back, "Who are you?" The next morning the page replied, "You've met me before, but not yet. Follow the name." So I did. I started digging. T.E. Weaver wasn't in any official national park database, not on payroll, not in retirement records, but there was a mailing address connected to a decades-old ranger application. It led me to Abalone, Oregon, population 602, a dead logging town surrounded by an old-growth forest no one had touched in years. Locals didn't talk much. When I asked about Weaver, most just shook their heads, until one old man hunched with eyes like burnt glass leaned in and said, "You don't find Weaver, you remember him." I found the cabin 2 miles beyond the edge of the official trail system. Not the cabin, not the one from Stone Hollow, but something older, smaller, made from trees so ancient the wood had fossilized. Inside it smelled like moss and ash. There was no furniture, no windows, just a desk and a single chair facing the wall. And on that wall, pinned pages, hundreds of them. Each one a different version of the story. One was a script for a horror podcast episode. One looked like a YouTube thumbnail storyboard. One was printed as a Reddit post under R no sleep. One was handwritten on torn brown parchment. And in the corner of every single one, the same small signature, Weaver. I turned around, and he was there, old, barefoot, wearing a ranger's coat from another century, eyes clouded, but not blind. "Too late to stop it now," he said. His voice was like wind through dry leaves. "Are you Weaver?" I asked. "No," he said. "We are." He gestured at the wall of stories. "This is how it stays alive," he whispered. "The cabin is not a place, not even a creature. It is a hunger, a template. It takes form through us." I shook my head. "What do you mean, us?" He stepped closer. His skin was like paper cracking at the joints. "I wrote the first one. Back when I was a ranger, saw the chair, heard the voice, made the mistake of telling someone. Then they wrote it. Then someone else did. And someone else." He looked up at me, tears in his eyes. I tried to control it, shape it, trap it in words. But the more I wrote, the more it fed. "The story writes itself now." I stepped back. "This is a horror story," I said. "A true, scary story. You created the first creepy story that never ends." I recorded the first one, he corrected. "The cabin existed long before me. I just gave it form." He handed me a key. "What's this?" "The last cabin," he said. "The one before it spreads for good." "It's already global," I replied. "It's everywhere. Podcasts, Reddit, TikTok. People don't even know they're repeating it." He nodded. "But there's one place it hasn't reached yet. One medium it can't reach, not if you act first." I narrowed my eyes. "What medium?" He grinned, and for a moment I saw eyes inside his mouth. Silence. The cabin was in Blue Canyon, at the edge of the largest soundproof testing facility in North America. The government had built it decades ago to test stealth aircraft. It was now abandoned. I had the key and the notebook. The plan was insane. Trap the story in a room that cannot be heard, not by voice, not by page, not by screen, only silence. I stepped inside the chamber. It was colder than I expected, like the air couldn't decide how to move. I brought no phone, no mic, no camera, only a pen and the final page of the notebook. On it, I wrote, "This is the last telling." Then I waited. The lights flickered, a hum filled the room, not sound vibration. In the bones, in the skull. Then the chair appeared, middle of the room, empty, rocking, and from behind it, a shape. Faceless, endless, watching. But no words came, no whispers, no, "You shouldn't be here," because in the silence it was powerless. I stared back. "You're not a story," I said. "You're a virus, a loop, and I'm breaking you." I tore the notebook page in half, then again and again until it was dust. The figure stopped moving, the chair froze, and in a blink, gone. I don't know if it's over, but it's been 3 months. No new true horror stories from hikers, no strange Reddit threads about creepy ranger stories, no viral videos of haunted cabins or true tales from the woods. Even Black Forest disbanded. Maybe it worked. Or maybe it's waiting. But if one day you're on a hike and you see a notebook by itself on a rock, unopened, don't touch it. Let silence hold it. Let it rot. Because the only way to starve a story, to stop telling it. It started again with a dream. A cabin, empty, still, no whispers. But someone was sitting in the rocking chair now, me. When I woke up, I had a pen in my hand, and I had written something in the dark. 6 words looped over and over on the back of my bedroom wall. "You remember? So it remembers you." 3 months had passed since I entered the chamber, since I tried to bury the story in a vacuum silence so deep it could suffocate sound memory meaning. And for a while I thought it worked. No more weird broadcasts, no strange ranger disappearances, no sudden Reddit threads about creepy stories in national parks. But I underestimated one thing: echoes. Because even silence leaves an aftertaste. It began with a voicemail from Ellie. Even though she was gone, even though I watched her file be closed and her apartment emptied, I picked up my phone and saw one missed call from unknown. Message length 0:13 seconds. I pressed play, white noise, then her voice, distant, strained, like underwater. It's writing again, but not in words. Then static, then laughter, a child's laughter, not hers. I played it again, slowed it down, boosted the audio. I shouldn't have, because behind the static under the laugh, another voice was embedded, a whisper, the same cadence from the old notebook. But this time it wasn't saying, "You shouldn't be here." It said, "You brought it home." I went outside. Neighbors' lights were flickering in sequence like Morse code. Their TVs played snow. Their radios crackled even when unplugged. A local newspaper headline flapped on a porch step: "Popular YouTuber vanishes after posting creepy forest story." I felt sick. I clicked the link in the article. It took me to a now deleted video titled "True Creepy Story, Cabin in the Wild, Park Ranger Confession." The thumbnail was me. A freeze frame from a video I never recorded. In the comments: "This dude's acting is insane. Real or not, I had dreams after this. Anyone else hear a voice at 4:31? I clicked play, but the screen said, "Video removed by uploader." Then beneath it in smaller text, "But the story has already been seen." I ran back inside, turned off every screen, every speaker, unplugged everything. But my mirror, the one in the hallway, had something new on it, written backward in black ash: "You made them remember." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound, creak, rustle, whisper of wind became suspect. Every flicker of shadow looked like someone sitting in a chair, just out of view. So I did the one thing I swore I'd never do again. I opened Reddit, searched for park ranger stories. Top result: the cabin no one, built my uncle's story, posted 2 hours ago. I clicked. It started with, "He was never the same after leaving the Black Forest program. He stopped speaking, but sometimes in his sleep he'd whisper, 'They're still reading, they're still listening.'" It included names, my name, details from reports never released, descriptions of Ellie, Agent Heller, the soundproof chamber, the notebook, things I never told anyone. I tried to reply, to say it wasn't real, but my comment wouldn't post. A warning popped up: "You are not allowed to respond to this version of the story." What the hell did that mean? The post had 3,900 upvotes and rising. The more people read it, the more I felt it. The cabin, it was back. But this time not in a park, not in a forest, not even in the real world. It was in the minds of the readers. Every reader, every comment, every share, like creepy outdoor stories gone viral but feeding something invisible. Not fame, not views, fuel. And then I realized silence wasn't the prison. It was the key. Because now that people were telling it again, not just reading but responding, the story had paths, exits, portals. And every time someone tagged a friend, said, "Let's read this together," or whispered, "This gave me chills," they became hosts. I found the mirror again. The ash had changed. Now it said, "Your words are louder than your silence ever was." The next day, 3 people showed up at my door. None of them spoke. They handed me an envelope. Inside, a flash drive, no label, and a note. "We're not here to stop the story. We're here to guide it, and you are going to finish writing it." Underneath one more line, the architect was just the seed. The echo is the forest. I asked who sent them. They only smiled, then turned in unison and walked away. That night, I plugged in the flash drive. There was one file, Chapter 0, Move. I clicked. It was a screen recording of a forum post being typed slowly, like by hand. Title, "Let's Not Meet. The Park Ranger Who Brought the Cabin Home, the Author." My username, the date, tomorrow. I tried deleting the file. It duplicated. I yanked the drive out. It was blank. When I looked back at my laptop, the file was on my desktop, and then on my phone, then on my smart TV, everywhere. And in the middle of the screen, the cabin, still waiting, chair empty. And this time there was no caption, only one option, write. So I'm writing this now because it wants me to, because the next version of the story doesn't start with the woods. It starts with you and how you felt when you read this. Did your stomach twist? Did your lights flicker? Did your cat suddenly stare into the dark corner of your room? Good, that means the echo has found you. You don't need a notebook or a rocking chair or a forest trail. You just need memory and fear and a moment, one simple second when you say, "This story felt too real." Because the next time someone whispers, "You shouldn't be here," you'll know they're not talking to you. They're talking to the story inside you. The first reader found me in a library. It wasn't a fan or a follower or someone who had heard the story on Reddit. No, this man had never touched a screen in his life. He was blind, but he sat across from me in the silent corner of the archive room and said clear as morning, "You told it wrong." I didn't ask who he was, didn't ask how he found me. I just stared. He leaned forward, cracked knuckles like snapping twigs. "You cut the story short. Left out the part where it becomes them. That's the part no one ever finishes." I tried to walk away, but every hallway was suddenly unfamiliar. The lights flickered, the floor tilted, and all the exits led to the same room, back to him, back to the table, back to the story. "You don't leave the story," he said. "The story leaves you, once it's done writing you in." The readers started appearing more frequently after that. One at a gas station, woman in her 60s humming a lullaby I knew but had never heard. One at a motel, a kid no older than 10, drawing a cabin over and over in the guest book. And one in my rearview mirror, mouth moving in silence while my radio hissed a static version of my name. They were all different, but they shared one thing: their eyes, not black, not white, not empty, but reflective like glass, like mirrors. And when I looked too long, I didn't see them. I saw me sitting in the cabin reading. Ellie once said the story writes itself. Weaver said the same, and now I understood the rest. It also casts itself. It makes characters. Some read, some listen, some become. I got an email one morning from myself. Different email address. But my words, my sentence structure, my way of typing, subject, "Let's not meet ever again," attached a PDF file named Episode Script Draft 6.pdf. I opened it. It was a transcript of Part 7, a part I hadn't written yet, but it described what I'd do next, where I'd go, who I'd meet, how I'd die. The end of the document read, and as he finishes this paragraph, he feels the cold breath on his neck and does not turn around. I dropped the laptop, didn't turn, didn't move, not that night, not the next. I went back to the only place that had ever held the story in check. The chamber, the soundproof room from Part 4. It was abandoned now, but I had a key and a plan. This time I wouldn't bring the notebook, wouldn't bring a phone or a recorder or a pen or a reader, just one thing, a blank sheet of paper and myself. I sat in the middle of the chamber, no chair, no voice. I whispered to the paper, "What do you want from me?" Nothing happened. Then letters began to appear, written in ash. "We want to be read, but more than that, we want to be remembered." The paper darkened, lines wrote themselves. The more eyes on us, the more pages we gain. The more pages, the more people. The more people, the more versions. Then a final line, "You don't end stories like us. You inherit them." I left the chamber at dawn, and when I walked out, the world was rewriting itself. Billboards had strange words. Books in the store had blank endings. News anchors hesitated mid-sentence as if waiting for lines to load. Reality was stalling, like a system buffering too many threads, too many readers. At the airport, I saw a teenager watching a video on his phone. Sound off? I glanced at the screen, my face, my voice, but I'd never recorded it. The subtitles read, "Based on a true horror story from a national park you've never heard of." The reader next to him turned, smiled. "Do you remember how it ends?" I didn't answer, because I suddenly couldn't remember how it began. The story doesn't need a forest anymore. It doesn't need a cabin. It just needs an audience, a mirror, you. So if you're reading this and your lights flicker, if you hear a voice say, "Don't go upstairs," but you live in a one-story house, if you dream of a chair rocking in a room with no wind, you are not alone. You are one of us. You are a reader, and the story is still being written. I didn't write this part, not really. I just woke up and it was there, typed into my laptop, titled in bold, Part 7, The Rewrite. The file name was Final Draft V1, Docs. But when I opened it, the document said Last Revision Active. The cursor was blinking, and every time I moved my hands away from the keyboard, it kept typing. I tried shutting down the laptop. It stayed on. I yanked the power cord. The screen stayed bright. Then letter by letter, a message appeared. "Don't fight the ending. We're just getting to the good part." Reality began to bend 2 days later. It started with small things. Street signs misspelled. Time moving inconsistently. People asking me about things I hadn't done, conversations I never had. Then, names changed. Ellie was now L in my memories. Weaver's file said E.T. Weaver. My own birth certificate had the wrong middle name. It wasn't memory loss. It was rewriting. The story was editing its world, like a document, cutting, pasting, deleting scenes that no longer served its arc. Because now it wanted an ending, and it wanted me to finish it. I flew back to Stone Hollow National Park, the original place, where the cabin first showed itself to me. Except now, there were roads, a visitor center, trail maps that included the Northwest Ridge labeled clearly as Cabin Path, Storyline Trailhead. They had turned it into a tourist attraction. People posed for selfies at the base of the hill. Some wore custom shirts. "I survived the ranger's tale, you shouldn't be here. S 2022. A vendor sold notebooks with ash-colored covers. The words on the front, "Let's not meet again." I walked the trail alone. The crowd stayed behind. It was sunset, exactly like the first time. Same cold in the wind, same silence in the trees that didn't match nature. When I reached the clearing, I froze, because the cabin was there, but this time, it was massive, not a shack, not a cottage. It was a mansion of wood, and shadow. Endless stories stacked atop one another, rooms layered with whispers, windows staring back, and carved across the doorway, here lies the last draft. Inside, the layout had changed. The floor was a spiral staircase. It went down forever. Each level held a scene I'd lived. Some I hadn't. Some that hadn't happened yet, but the walls were made of text, printed from floor to ceiling. Lines I'd written, lines I'd read, lines written in my voice, but with your words. Then at the very center, the spiral ended. There was a desk, a typewriter. One key was missing, the period. I sat down, because what else was there to do? Above the desk, a mirror. In it, I didn't see myself. I saw you reading this right now. Then the paper rolled into the typewriter, and the ribbon began to move by itself. One sentence appeared. When the story is read by enough eyes, the ending becomes reality. Suddenly behind me, the room cracked. Not like wood, like logic, like the air couldn't hold the weight of so many narratives. And through the cracks came the figures, the readers, silent, watching, waiting for the last word. I screamed into the darkness, "What happens if I don't finish it?" The typewriter answered, "Then they do." And all at once 1,000 typewriters echoed in the mansion, all writing at once, all different versions. One said I burned the cabin, one said I became the chair, one said I handed the story to a child. But only one version felt cold, felt final, the one you're reading now. Because this is the draft that made it through, the version that survived the deletions, the one that felt real enough to believe. So here it is, the final page. The story ends here unless you retell it, you adapt it, you upload your own version. You say this would make a great short film. You make it a podcast, a creepypasta, a TikTok voiceover, a campfire anecdote. The story ends only if it's read and left. Not liked, not shared, not reimagined, because every continuation is a resurrection. So now it's your choice. Close the tab, delete the file, forget the story, let silence reclaim it, or press send. And if you do choose to pass it on, if someone else reads it, tell them don't worry, it's just a story, and maybe, just maybe, it will believe you. But if you hear a whisper that night, if your mirror doesn't show your reflection, if your hallway grows longer than it used to be, if your memory feels overwritten, then you'll know. The rewrite accepted your submission. I wasn't supposed to come back. That was the whole point of the rewrite. Close the loop, finish the last sentence, leave the story unshared. But stories don't care what you intend, especially ones that remember. And this one, it never forgets its characters. The first sign something was wrong came from the ranger station. Yes, that station. I got an email. Government domain, old header, subject, you have been reinstated. Message, reporting order post Stone Hollow. North Ridge Patrol, date, immediate reason trail, maintenance/containment protocol. There was no sender name, just a signature some. I hadn't been a park ranger in years. Didn't even have a valid ID. But when I arrived, the station doors slid open like they'd never been locked. Uniforms hung, waiting. My locker had my name, still spelled correctly, which was the strangest part. Everything had been restored, like I had never left, like the last 7 parts of this story never happened. But when I looked at the map on the wall, a chill ran through me. The cabin was gone. No trail marker, no cabin path, not even the ridge. The whole northwest quadrant of Stone Hollow was just labeled unwritten. I walked outside, and the woods had changed again. Not darker, just empty. Silent, but not in the way nature is silent. Silent in the way a room goes quiet when someone's reading over your shoulder. I took the trail anyway, or where the trail used to be. Every step was déjà vu. The same crunch of gravel, the same bend in the trees. But no birds, no wind, no time. It felt like the whole world had paused, waiting for a sentence to be typed. And then I saw it, a single sign nailed to a tree. Carved, not printed. Old, weathered, welcome back author. And beyond it, the cabin. Not twisted, not shifting, just as it was that first day, simple, wooden, still. But on the porch this time sat a woman, face down, hair, black dress torn at the edge like static, and beside her a notebook, open, fresh page fluttering in the breeze that didn't yet exist. I stepped forward. She raised her face. It was Ellie, but not. Her eyes were reflective. Her mouth didn't move, but I heard her speak inside my skull. You finished the draft, but not the memory. She pointed to the notebook. It's time for the return. I picked up the pen, and it wrote by itself. Chapter 8. He returned to the cabin he had abandoned only to realize it had never let him leave. Because he never stopped reading, not truly. He carried it in his bones, in his breath, in the tiny rewrites he made every time he told someone he was okay. He was not okay. He was the story now. I dropped the pen. The woman Ellie, or whatever was using her memory, stood and stepped inside the cabin. I followed. I didn't want to, but you already knew that part. Inside was a mirror, old, cracked, but no reflection, only words, thousands, from every reader who had ever commented, posted, whispered, shared. Usernames flashed across the glass. Snippets of comments like, "This was too real, I felt like I was there." I dreamed of the rocking chair after reading this. And then, your name, not your screen name, your real name, just for a second, just long enough to know the story sees you too. I turned away, but the mirror followed me. The cabin began to creak like old paper. The walls peeled. Pages fell from the ceiling. Each page was a different version of the ending, some kind, some cruel, some blank. One of them said, "He woke up. It had all been a dream." Another said, "He never left. He never will." But one I hadn't written floated into my hands. At the top it said, Chapter 9, You. And the rest of the page was empty, because that chapter hadn't happened yet, because you hadn't written it. The story ends only if someone refuses to finish it, only if someone reads without retelling. But if you say, "I want more," if you tell a friend, "Dude, this would make a killer video if you post, comment, whisper, or even remember it too vividly," then you've started the return. The cabin doesn't want to kill you. It wants to continue you, make you part of the mythology, make you say the line that started it all. Say it with me. You shouldn't be here. Now look around. Are you still in your room? Is your reflection moving? Was that creak just the floorboards or the chair? This is the return, not to a place, to a state, where every reader becomes a rememberer, and every rememberer becomes a rewriter. And now that you've read this, there is no next part, unless you create it, unless you pick up the pen, unless you tell someone, "This story messed me up." So here's what you do. Nothing. Don't share, don't comment, don't even finish this line, because if you do, so here's what you do. Nothing. Don't share, don't comment, don't even finish this lie you just did. A cold breeze moves through your room. No windows open, no vent humming, but you feel it, the weight of something invisible, reading with you. You try to laugh it off. It's just a story. Except your screen doesn't respond when you scroll. Your cursor freezes. For a moment, the text looks different. You're not just reading the ending, you're becoming it. Then silence. Long, hollow, until you hear it from somewhere behind you. Not a whisper, a creak, a chair rocking slowly, even though there are no chairs in your room, or weren't. You turn to check. There's nothing there. Of course, there's nothing there. But when you look back at the screen, the ending has changed. Now it says Chapter 9, insert name. Their story began the moment they couldn't forget, the moment they said it out loud, the moment they shared. A single line appears below, flashing. Just one request, type the next sentence. And you will. Maybe not now, maybe not here, but someday, in a comment, in a DM, in a whisper to a friend who likes scary stuff. You'll tell them, There's this story you need to hear, and the cabin will find its way back. Not every story survives. Some get buried under edits, others deleted unfinished, rewritten by someone else, but a few they slip through the cracks. They linger in drafts, in broken links, in the minds of readers who swore they read something that no longer exists. This is that story, the forgotten chapter, and the place it lives. You've been there before, you just forgot. It begins at 2:37 a.m., always that time. You wake up suddenly, no sound, no nightmare, just the feeling that something's missing. You try to recall what you dreamt, but instead of a dream, you remember a sentence out of context, wrong punctuation, someone else's voice in your memory. He opened the door and it was never closed again. You don't remember reading that, but you know you did. Somewhere in a hidden corner of the Ranger archives, there's a locked drawer labeled Redacted Incidents. Class oral transfer only. Inside, cassette tapes, burnt photos, ash-covered notebooks, and a folder, thin, unlabeled, inside a map, but not of any park. A map of a space between drafts, a place where deleted stories wait. They call it the Between. Agent Heller once told me not everything the cabin wrote made it into the final cut. Some versions were too dangerous. They didn't scare, they infected. Those were scrapped, forgotten, or so we thought. But the Between, it's where those rejected chapters kept writing themselves, and now they're leaking back in. It started with users on Reddit swearing they'd read chapters that don't exist. Wait, wasn't there a version where the cabin was underwater? I remember a part where the Ranger finds himself buried in the forest. Didn't there used to be a story where the notebook started talking all downvoted, all removed, all archived? Except some people still remember them, and the more they do, the clearer they get. Until one night someone writes, "I found the cabin in my old drafts folder," and uploads it. I received a copy, encrypted, anonymous, the file name P0.5A's The Forbidden Chapter.txt, its contents. This isn't part 1, this isn't part 10, this is the space in between, where the cabin doesn't just exist, it feeds on every line you erased. That night, I dreamed again, but this time it was not a dream. I was back at Stone Hollow. Only, it was wrong. Everything was mirrored, upside down. The trees hung from the sky. The trail was paved with typewriter keys. And the cabin, it was breathing. Every plank of wood expanded with a silent inhale, and its door opened on its own. Inside, there was no furniture, just a voice. "You deleted us. We remember." I walked deeper. Each room was a scene I never wrote. One showed Ellie turning to ash mid-sentence. One showed me carving out my own voice and burying it. One showed you, yes, you, sitting reading, your eyes bleeding ink. Each version twisted, each version wrong, each version real, because stories never really disappear. They just wait to be read again. At the heart of the cabin, a chair, empty, facing a screen, not a mirror, a screen, and on it a video playing. It showed a man reading a story on his laptop, reading these words, reading this very chapter, and behind him, the chair started to creak. I tried to scream, but the screen whispered back, "Forgotten stories don't scream, they echo." And suddenly I was no longer in the cabin. I was sitting at my desk, waking up, only I didn't remember writing this, but here it was. Typed, published, viewed, shared. And then came the email from no reply at between.ch. Subject, thank you for returning the chapter. Attachment next draft, v0.docs message. The forgotten chapter was never meant to be read, but you've ensured it lives again. Welcome back, author. Welcome back, reader. There is no part 10. There is only what you remember and what you choose to forget. So here's the question now. What will you do? Forget this. Let it fade, or will you go searching for old drafts, unfinished files, That strange audio you swear you once heard late at night but can't find again. Because if you do, you'll find the between, and it will find you. Just one rule if you do: don't write anything down. That's how it starts again. That's how the story escapes. That's how the next part begins.